Hello, dear listener, and welcome to Sitcom Showdown number 95. Is it, Steve?
It is 95. We're getting right up there.
Oh, man. Yeah, I thought we got up to episode 97 for a second there.
Getting a bit ahead of yourself.
Thinking it was. Possibly. Anyway, here we are, and it is October 2022. So it's Halloween time, and my tradition of only marginally Halloween-themed episodes, which I think from memory includes Bottom with their brilliant Halloween episode, which I think totally qualifies. But this is less so. So this is an episode of Count Arthur Strong called Stuck in the Middle, Series 2, Episode 4. And I'm putting this as the Halloween episode because it's got horror elements and not only physical horror, but psychological horror.
Ooh.
Yes. I'm Jeffers, by the way, one of your co-hosts. And as I referred to you by name earlier, Steve, people... they should know who you are.
Yeah, they know who I am already.
Surely. Oh. Yes, and Sitcom Showdown, of course, is where we look at sitcoms that, when we started the podcast, we would nominate for a Hall of Fame. However, when we do these special episodes, like a Halloween one or an actor special, they don't necessarily have to be nominated for the Hall of Fame. And I do think right off the bat here, Steve, that this episode, brilliant as it is I'm going to say how brilliant it is. I don't think you'd put it in the Hall of Fame, but we'll find out at the end.
Yeah, we could have that discussion at the end.
Maybe we'll need that to chill ourselves out after all the harrowing stuff that we're going to...
After the psychological drama. Yeah.
So let's talk about Count Arthur Strong a bit. I've got here that it's a sitcom that ran for 3 series between 2013-2017 in the UK. And it was directed, this particular episode, it was directed by Graham Linehan and written by Graham Linehan and Steve Delaney. And of course, Steve Delaney plays the role of Count Arthur Strong, which is entirely his creation. A character he invented years before the TV show, and he performed as Count Arthur, doing plenty of radio and other things. And he hasn't quite got the history of John Shuttleworth, but
No, but he's continued doing live shows. Yeah, Steve has. I know, because I see them, all the happy people going to say hello to him after a show. Oh, man. Getting autographs and photos and all that sort of thing.
Anyway, this particular episode of Count Arthur Strong, and I'll describe the sitcom in a minute, is, as I said, it is called Stuck in the Middle, and it is right in the middle of Series 2, but it went out on the 27th of January 2015 on BBC One at 10:35 p.m.
But 10:35 p.m.?
Yeah.
It's quite a late slot.
You'd be happy it's on BBC One, but you'd be unhappy at the time it went out.
Maybe because it's so dark and psychological, this one got pushed back. So it didn't scare the kiddies.
Oh. I wonder what day of the week the 27th of January 2015 was.
Well, if you really wanted to know, I guess you could look it up.
I could have looked it up, but can't be bothered. Okay, so a description anyway, Steve, of the series as a whole, all of Count Arthur, taken from IMDb is, quote, delusional show business character Count Arthur Strong, a pompous out-of-work actor from Doncaster, attempts to recount his life story with the help of the scholarly son of his former comedy partner. I don't think that's right, Steve, and I'd have a different description. What do you think is wrong with that description?
Well, I think that sums up season 1, doesn't it? But not second and third seasons.
Yeah. And I know the show is called Count Arthur Strong, but really I don't think it's as much about Count Arthur as it is about Michael. So my description, which I come up with myself, is a young writer named Michael Baker, while struggling to write his famous father's biography, gets pulled into the madcap world of his father's former comedy double-act partner, the long-forgotten Count Arthur Strong.
Wow.
Anyway, as I said before, Steve, this particular episode of Count Arthur, because it's called Stuck in the Middle, and I noted with a little laugh that it is literally right in the middle of the show, meaning that this is the 10th show out of the 20 episodes they made.
Now, I do have something to say about this title.
Oh, okay.
Is that the only thing you've got to say about this title? Because I don't want to steal
I know
this.
There's a song, that song.
Yeah. Stuck in the middle with you.
Are you suggesting, Steve, and I don't want to steal your thunder, that was famously used in a certain scene?
Exactly.
Oh, cool. Well, tell us.
Yes, so that song, Stuck in the Middle with You, was in Reservoir Dogs in a scene where Mr. Blonde is dancing around and torturing a security guard who is tied up. So I think that they very deliberately used this title as a as a reference or a throwback to that.
So at this point in the middle of the second series, Steve, for any show, this applies to any show, especially sitcoms.
Mm-hmm.
In the middle of the second series, you should absolutely have your system down, right? So when you've written the first series and you might not have cast people, you've got the excuse of, okay, we don't know how these lines are going to work with these actors, blah, blah, blah. So they've had a whole first series to know, oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Now we know that Steve Delaney's capable of this, and we know that, Rory Kinnear can do X. And so you can tailor your second series to the brilliant stuff the actors do. So this should be peak Count Arthur, because it's also in the middle of the second series before you start running out of ideas and things jump the shark and you have to come up with crazier and crazier crap.
Like soupovers.
Yeah, soupovers, exactly. Just, spoilers for the listener. Did you enjoy all the soup references in this episode?
I loved the soup references.
Oh, cool. I'm glad about that. Yes. That's just a little observation about where this is in the whole series. You've got something to add about the soup.
Just the fact that Count Arthur tortures people with soup.
Regularly.
Yeah.
Well, there's a Wikipedia elevator pitch for this specific episode, and all it says is, a con man rues the day he tangled with Arthur. I think that's pretty good.
That's on point.
Yep. The IMDb plot of this episode, which, as we know, is just written by some random bloke and not some sort of showbiz expert who's a sitcom specialist.
Yes, but having said that, we we take those IMDb bits for ourselves all the time.
Oh, we totally do. Anyway, so the IMDb plot of this episode, written by a rando, is, having seen the psychiatric assessment of Arthur for his failed audition for Celebrity Flatshare, the cafe owner Bullant is convinced that Arthur is a dangerous psychopath. Meanwhile, a rogue plumber who's been ripping off the cafe's customers makes the mistake of calling on Arthur to repair his boiler, and as a result of Arthur's well-meaning but misunderstood eccentricities, decides to change for the better.
Well, I applaud the random person that wrote that for IMDb, because they did a pretty good job. And they've brought in the, would you call it the B plot? But yeah, they brought that into it as well. Which is Boulant and Michael and everything that's going on there.
Another thing we should mention, Steve, which isn't in my notes, is that Series 2 sort of falls between, it's before Birdie comes in, and, but we lose, and I'm very sorry I've forgotten the character's name. So we've got these vital, missing character here at this point in Series 2, and so you lose a little bit there. But so I'm just explaining this in advance, because when we go through the cast of the show, we're not going to have...
We'll be missing a couple of people.
Yeah, that's right. Anyhow, yes, Steve Delaney, as Count Arthur Strong, described as the elderly out-of-work actor from Doncaster with delusions that he's a show business legend. The character has been described as a mixture of physical and mental clumsiness, mirthful malapropisms, and Tourettic tics. And Arthur's pride forbids him from ever conceding fallibility, even as his world crashes around him. So there you go. But I didn't put down anything else that Steve Delaney's been in. Because talk about typecasting, he's going to be Count Arthur for the rest of his life.
He's done it to himself.
Yeah. However, with the other main star of the show, Rory Kinnear, core blimey, he's a versatile dude.
Well, even in the time since we first covered Count Arthur, he's gone on from strength to strength, and I'm sure you're about to mention some of those more recent things.
Probably not, no. Yeah, so his character, Rory Kinnear, as Michael Baker. So Michael's a writer, and he's described as shy and bookish. This person's called him an effeminate and pathetic man, and he's using Arthur's anecdotes to help write his late father's biography. Anyway, I've described Rory Kinnear as a Shakespearean actor, which isn't inaccurate.
No, that's quite correct.
Yeah. We covered him in Quacks as well. Or you did a brilliant review of the Quacks DVD. Is that on our YouTube channel, Steve?
Sure is.
Oh, good. Plug. He's been in 4 Bond films, and particularly for this role, very well suited, because his father is the great comedian Roy Kinnear. And so playing a role of a dude whose dad was a famous comedian, he's bang on for it. So it's pretty good. People can look up Rory Kinnear if they want to. But let's move on to Chris Ryman as Bullant, described as an irascible, hot-tempered owner of Arthur's local cafe, constantly irritated by Arthur's bumbling. But Chris, he's had a lot of TV. He had regular roles in Casualty. As far as comedy goes, there was a sketch show called No Signal. But most recently, he did some acting in the superhero movie Morbius, starring Jared Leto, which is critically panned, but I thought it was, a solid 6.5 out of 10.
Okay.
So that's all right.
Did you remember seeing him in that?
No.
Perhaps he was playing a vampire or something.
Yeah, well, it was pretty shadowy, man. It was very shadowy sort of, And Matt Smith is chewing the scenery in that movie, so you get distracted by Matt Smith.
He does some dancing in that.
Yeah, he does, with his shirt off and all that sort of bizzo. Let's move on to Zara Ahmadi as Sinem, who's Bullant's younger sister. She's described as having a mischievous sense of humour. I like Sinem. She's a great character and sort of keeps everyone grounded. I
was going to say she's the younger sister, but
yeah, has to.
She's telling them all off in this one. It's quite good.
Yeah, if she wasn't there, stuff would, the cafe would probably be burnt to the ground.
Things would get out of hand.
They would get out of hand. Anyhow, yes, Zara was on EastEnders for a couple of years in 2007, 2008. She was a regular on American TV drama Berlin Station, but, we like to focus on comedy, as you know. So she was in 2 episodes of The Porridge Revival in 2017, which I'm sure make you roll your eyes. I didn't mind The Porridge Revival, but I understand why people did not like it.
The reheating of porridge?
Yeah, Steve, that's well put. So moving on to Eggy and John the Watch. So Andy Linden is John the Watch.
Classic characters.
Oh, yeah, they are classic characters. Unfortunately, I ran out of paper space here, so I didn't put down any of their other roles. So we've got John the Watch.
It's a Word document. What are you talking about?
An enigmatic...
That's the most pathetic excuse I've ever heard.
Yeah, I ran out of time is what was happening there. He's a regular at the cafe, Steve, and he is a close friend of Arthur's. Now, has Andy Linden been in anything else that you know of?
No.
Moving on to Eggy, as played by Dave Plimmer. He's a quiet, gentle, melancholy cafe regular, obsessed with the supposed evils of eggs and other conspiracy theories. And I know I'm doing a disservice to Andy Linden and Dave Plimmer here by not covering other roles they've been in, but bloody hell, the cast of this show is really good. Like they're all very solid. There's a special guest actor who is Phil the dodgy plumber in this episode, but also Arthur's victim. We're going to cover him later on when we get into the action.
What about the psychiatrist dude?
Yeah, didn't bother with him.
Okay. He doesn't rate a mention?
No. He won't get a mention on the next prog.
Yeah, ran out of room.
Yeah, I did. So how did you come across Count Arthur, Steve?
I must have got sent onto it on YouTube because I think, or somewhere else. Anyway, I watched The Soup Over. That was the first episode I watched.
Oh, okay.
Somehow. I can't remember how. And then I got the season 1 DVD. And then I think season 1 was all we had when we recorded our previous podcast about Count Arthur.
Sounds about right.
And then, we've gone on to watch 2 and 3, obviously, and own both of those. But yeah, the exact details of the first watching are a bit of a mystery.
Oh.
But I can't remember it was that episode, and I thought, what the dickens is this?
So would it have been not long after that you... Well,
The Soup Over's in season 3 too. Season 3, so that's kind of interesting. Maybe it was only season 1 that was out on DVD at the time or something. Yeah.
Well, when we did Count Arthur previously, that was 4.5 years ago. Sitcom Showdown 25. Yes, contemporary to the thing. Anyway...
I think time has been kind to it.
I reckon. Yeah. As for how I got into it is because you introduced me to it. But see, I'd heard of it before in passing and I judged it by the title. So someone had said, blah, 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 Count Arthur Strong. So I immediately ignored it because it didn't sound like anything I'd be interested in. Like when I was a kid, obviously, people would talk about Dad's Army and I didn't care about armies or dads. So I wasn't going to be watching anything to do with dads or armies.
Yep.
And as an adult, of course, I love that show, but yeah.
If someone had told you it's just have you watched the new Graham Linehan sitcom, would you have been more interested in it?
I totally would. And that's what you did, is you had to explain to me, Jeffrey, this is a Graham Linehan sitcom. Yeah, that's right. And I just thought it was fantastic. So it was brilliant. Yeah. So that's Sitcom Showdown 25, if anyone wants to listen to that. And just as a bit of a tangent here, Steve, you and I have discussed off air many, many times about the statistical anomaly that is Count Arthur, because that episode of the podcast we did is by far, well over 50%, the most downloaded episode we have. And not just from 4 years ago, like the total statistics on it, it's miles ahead, more than double the next nearest one. And even to this day, every month, it's usually, if it's not top of the downloads, our most recent one will be top of the downloads, but it'll be Count Arthur. And my theory is that we had one listener who just listens to it 6 times a day, and that's why the stats are so good. So if that's you, hi.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Should we feel quite chuffed with ourselves that we waited a further 90 episodes then to milk the Count Arthur
70-odd episodes?
Downloads?
Totally. Yeah, in fact, it's been another
70.
Another 70 episodes before we cut. And I'm always saying we need to cover more Count Arthur. And here we are. So it's time now that we've gone on for far longer than we normally do. Let's have the theme tune and a clip and get into the synopsis.
I need you to sign this so I can start.
What did you say your name was again?
Yeah, it's Phil, but look...
To Phil. I'll never forget all the laughs. Arthur.
I don't want your autograph.
Oh, it's for a friend, is it? What's his name?
No.
Oh, or her name. Is there a Mrs. Phil you haven't told me about?
No.
It's all right, you're entitled to a private life. I've obviously touched a nerve there. I'll not prod you further. What did you say her name was?
I need you to sign this so I can't bloody charge you.
Well, why didn't you say so? Wasting my time asking me for my autograph for your wife.
I didn't.
Why can't I just be an ordinary person for once? Must I constantly be harassed by members of the public trying to get something from me? I'm just a regular Joe, like you, Phil. Well, not like you, because I'm famous and you're a plumber.
Now, before we begin the synopsis, Steve, just a reminder to the regular listener about a slight change of format where recently, instead of doing a massive synopsis and then talking about the highlights and lowlights afterwards, we are now tackling the gags and the groans as they occur in the recounting. Anyway, so that's what we're doing. So we open with Arthur being interviewed in a psychiatric evaluation.
Yes.
Straight away, the setup of that is going to be funny.
It's genius.
It's about Arthur's suitability to handle the rigours of being in a reality TV show called Celebrity Flatshare. I reckon a lot of other people would have killed him after the first.
I was going to say they should be assessing the ability of others to withstand being locked up with Arthur. But...
Yep. Now, obviously, this is funny because it puts Arthur in the real world. He's always in the real world, right? But this is... in the world of the cafe, that's kind of Arthur's world. And in Series 1, we saw young Michael, as we were, he was pulled into Arthur's world in a way. And so we get desensitized to Arthur's bonkersness while in the cafe. So seeing him out and about in this bloke's office, these scenes in other locations with non-cafe people, always highlight the Arthurness of the... Anyway, you know what I'm saying. So... especially here, though, because the whole conversation is about how mad he is and is he mad and all these sorts of things.
Yeah, I like that. So did you catch what has elevated his, not that there's a lot of necessarily a high celebrity status required to get into the flat share, but do you remember why he has been recently elevated to the status of...
Yeah, because he punched a politician in the head.
Yeah.
Yes. Are we going to have a clip of this? Anyway, yes, it is very funny. So he's being pulled onto Celebrity Flatshare because obviously a Z-grade celebrity punched a politician in the head.
But I think that must have happened in the previous episode.
Oh, is this going back to the one where he ran for office?
Yeah, so that happened in the episode previous, that one was called We're Listening.
Right, so anyway, I do love that. That sets it up perfectly. Yeah, so Arthur punched this politician, and he does take pains to point out to the psychiatrist that he doesn't just go around punching people, Yeah. And he uses this guy. He goes, he starts down the road of using a guy called Chris Akabusi as an example of someone. Like, let's say this guy was in the house. Arthur's saying, I wouldn't just punch Chris Akabusi in the head.
For no reason, surely.
Yeah, and I had to look up who this is. This is a former Olympic athlete. Anyway, but I think they chose him because his name is very fun to say.
Oh, yes. Superb.
Yeah. So in typical Arthur fashion, though, this then becomes a reality in Arthur's head, because then he goes, well, look, and how did you get Chris Akabusi on the show? That's an amazing coup. How did you do that? And what's his problem with me?
Yeah.
This is like textbook how Arthur gets into these misunderstandings, and it almost ends in an argument with the psych dude. So let's have a clip.
Yes, so we're just going to have a little chat to check that you'll be able to withstand the day-to-day rigours of life in the flat with whichever celebrity has chosen to go in with you.
I've been getting a lot of offers like this ever since I punched that politician in the head. I suppose you're here to make sure I don't stop punching whoever else you get. Chris Akabusi or whatnot.
Well, the main thing
I can honestly say, hand on heart, I would only punch Chris Akabusi if he started it.
Well, that's good, isn't it?
So I do hope that set your mind at rest on the Akabusi front.
Absolutely.
Yes. You, that is a bit of a coup, getting him on board. How did you manage that?
No, he's
Why
not.
does he have a problem with me? What have I ever done to him? I've never even met the man. If you ask me, it's him you should be having a word with. Going round saying that.
So anyhow...
You're going to talk about the word association?
Please do, if you want to. What?
Well, one of the guy's techniques is to do a word association thing or whatever. And so he says to Arthur, so we're going to do this word association exercise, and I'm going to say something, and you'll give me the off-the-cuff first thing that comes into your mind. And Arthur says straight away, bollocks. That's what he thinks of the word association exercise.
Oh,
made me laugh.
And then they said tennis. And then he said penis.
Well, I think
like
he's
the
trying
comedian
to...
Dennis Pennis.
He's trying to avoid saying balls, right?
Yeah.
And he comes up with a penis. And it just gets worse from there.
Dear. I think that, in your average episode of the Sitcom Showdown podcast, we don't usually laugh this much. So we're like, 2 minutes into the episode, and just thinking about it is making us laugh, which I think is a good sign. Anyway, we cut to a little bit later where we learn that Arthur didn't get into Celebrity Flat Share. Arthur's not at the cafe, by the way. Yeah, boo.
That would have made a fantastic episode.
It really would. Anyway, where were we? Yeah, so we're in the cafe. Arthur's not there, and so Bullen and Sinem and Michael, they're all talking about Arthur, and Bullen, he insists Arthur failed the, as he calls it, the brain test, because Arthur's deranged, right?
Brain test.
Yeah, he goes, no wonder he failed the brain test. He's deranged. Michael, meanwhile, asks if he can, if Arthur can, it is possible to be both lovely and deranged. So there's no need to write Arthur off completely,
Yes.
Which is typical. And the whole thing that's going on with Michael and Bullen in this episode is that Bullen's always accusing Michael of being sitting on the fence because he doesn't want to offend anyone and he can't make decisions. Anyway, Michael says that Arthur was very annoyed about being turned down for the show, so much so that he's insisted on seeing their psych evaluation. So he's ordered a copy from them to see what they said about him.
I think the other thing to... Are we moving on from this scene?
Yeah.
Well, the other thing that's worth noting about this scene is that because Arthur's celebrity status has risen so high as a result of him punching the politician, he can no longer receive his own mail because... Obviously, the volume of fan mail is out of control, so Michael is getting Arthur's mail.
So he's insisted that Michael take his mail so that there's a barrier between Arthur and the lunatics who get in touch with him.
A security thing as
well. With the great joke being that Arthur's worried about lunatics. Which is true. But yeah, good point. And also...
I think that explains... You have to mention that because it explains why Michael's opening up his mail later.
It's Chekhov's mail redirection, is what that is. So you've got to mention the mail redirection in the first act so that you can bring it in the third act or whatever the hell.
I was thinking of Chekhov's dog.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's the dog that gets shut in the box and you don't know if it's still alive or not. Sorry, listeners. I think we're in one of those moods. Yes, anyway, so you've got to have that for plot reasons and all that sort of thing. So he does mention that, yes, Michael's taking on his mail.
Bulent is planting the seeds of doubt, or trying to plant the seeds of doubt.
Yeah. Things quickly turn serious, though, when there's a conversation in which we discover that Eggy has been ripped off by a bully boiler-fixing bloke, a dodgy plumber. And he runs this scam where he up front says, all right, this job's not going to take very long, but before I do it, you're going to have to sign this paperwork and I'll charge by the hour, and then they'll take, 8 to 10 hours to do something and charge hundreds and hundreds of pounds. Eggy had to pay this guy 200 quid and his boiler ended up not even being fixed by the end of it. And this guy apparently stood over Eggy at the cash machine saying he'd call the police for non-payment. Anyway, this horrible scam. And so we find out that Sinem and Bulent's mum got taken by the same scheme. And Bulent's rather keen to get his hands on this bloke. And then, of course, at this point, and this is some nicely done stuff by the writers, John the Watch says the foreboding words, what are the odds of someone else we know using the same guy? And then you immediately know it's going to be, cut to Arthur.
Yep.
Talking to the plumber. But I like this because, you've turned a weakness into a strength here by the writers, very obviously. You beat the viewer to the punch because, in these disaster comms like Britus and Tom Chance, we'd be sitting there as the viewer going, oh, well, these coincidences are too much. What are the odds of that happening? So they get ahead of us on that one.
Yep.
And, of course, we get a laugh out of it because we all know what's going to happen. So they turn a weakness into a joke. Anyway, sorry to crap on. As you'd expect, we do cut to Arthur's place where the dodgy plumber bloke literally says, yeah, this is a pretty easy fix. We'll be out of your hair in about an hour or so. And he just says to us, Arthur, just sign this. And now cue 5 minutes of some of the funniest comedy you'll see in your life.
Oh, goodness.
Arthur starts on talking about himself, so he, as he always does, he just goes, I'd be a great plumber. I wonder if it's because I'm such a strong swimmer.
I've got that one written down, and it's funny because you just go, but why?
Anything to do with water at all. And he just...
I think that's it, because then he talks about submarines.
Yeah. But he's also delusional because, of course, Arthur's always talking about how great he is at everything.
Oh, yes.
So he's telling this guy he's a great swimmer. Anyway, sorry, yes, you were saying the submarines. That's classic.
Yeah. If only he wasn't such a great celebrity, he might stoop to becoming a plumber.
Swimming?
Yes, so then when Arthur realises that he really does want, the plumber really does want the signature, he thinks he's asking for an autograph.
And he goes, don't worry about your bit of paper, I've got some photos over here.
Yeah.
I'll sign one of those for you.
Then the guy goes, no, I don't want your autograph. He goes, oh, so you want it for someone else then, do you?
It's for a friend of yours, is it? Or is there a wife you haven't told me about, Phil?
Mrs.
Phil. Obviously, we're skipping over some brilliant dialogue here, but then he eventually goes on a rant saying, I haven't got time to stand around here signing photographs for you and your wife, who he's completely made up. There is no wife, and they don't want an autograph. And it's classic Arthur.
He's asking Phil for his wife's name.
Yeah.
So he can write out the autograph. And he says, no, you're entitled to your private life. You're right. I'll not prod you further. And then he turns around immediately and says, what did you say her name was? Like if he signs an autograph for someone, it's just made his week, right?
Yeah. And that's why he's got the headshots waiting there ready to go.
Yeah. A big pile of them.
So this is, obviously it's a very funny scene, right? But this is, you think, you're just getting over that. And then there's the pen palaver, which comes after that. And then there's the glasses thing, as we're about to find out. So it's just, you think that's some comedy gold, and it's just hit after hit after hit. Anyway, yes, as we said, there's Arthur gets everything tangled. So in under 2 minutes, he's completely annoyed Phil, the scamming plumber. You can see the frustration building in Phil's face just with this autograph mix-up. But then we move on to the pen, which takes a minute to sort out.
Because once Phil's got the signature on the paper, his, right? He's got you, so
he can just delay and ramp up the hours.
Is Arthur...
Is he conscious of this?
Phil's thinking to himself, is this guy out of his mind, or is he deliberately going out of his way to try and avoid my scam by not signing, or what?
Oh, yeah, so there's these levels of psychological stuff going on.
Yeah, there's all sorts.
So as we point out, Steve, Arthur's finally twigged that Phil actually wants him to sign a document for the plumbing. And so he's finally got a pen now after the pen mix-up, which is incredibly frustrating and brilliant. And then we're just on the verge of actually moving the bloody plot forward.
Yep.
And then Arthur says, and this relates to what you were saying a minute ago, he goes, well, just before I sign this, I just don't sign anything people put in front of me. What are your credentials? And so Phil gets what is presumably his plumber's license out and shows it to him. And Arthur says, oh, this is no good. I'll have to get my glasses. And he's wearing glasses, but he has to get his other glasses. And then at this point...
He's got special glasses for looking at photos.
Yeah. So if you're me at this point, you were thinking, we were just out. We finally got it sorted. Now we're back in. And,
imagine how Phil feels.
Yeah. It's just so good. So we've got this whole new process, which is 10 times funnier than the previous ones. Arthur pulls out this massive tray of pairs of specs.
There's got to be 30 pairs of glasses.
And the usual back and forth. So he's picking them up and putting them on and going, ooh. And
well, the first pair doesn't have any lenses.
And
who would put them in there? That's stupid. Yeah. I'll just put them back very carefully.
Yeah.
And then when he does this, he picks up the same bloody pair.
Immediately. Yeah. And there's a callback to this in the final scenes of the episode. Right. So, yes, basically when I was writing my notes, Steve, I was laughing out loud at this stage. Now, I'm not normally a sort of laugh out loud guy. So I'll watch a sitcom and I'll think it's hilarious, but it has to do a lot to actually get a physical laugh out of me, which is a bit sad in some ways. But honestly, it's so funny in exchange. We're barely into the episode and I'm just laughing out loud. And so I'm just, yeah. I don't want to overhype it for the poor old listener, of course. They might watch it and think it's garbage, but we'll see how we go. Anyway, Arthur signs this thing, which makes Phil very happy, and he allows himself a little smile. Because as you said, he knows he's got Arthur now by the short and curlies.
He's all relaxed.
Yeah. So Arthur goes off to make Phil a nice cup of tea. And Phil, while alone, he takes this opportunity to ring his partner in crime, a nasty person called Steve, I should point out, to say, look, this job can be stretched out to a couple of days because this guy's off his rocker. You know, he's a total nutter. And so what this does, obviously, is it helps set up Phil as being a nasty man, which we need as the viewer because some terrible things are going to happen to him pretty shortly.
Yep. I also like how Phil says to Steve, you know, this is going to be the second job we've done in this small area, so it's time to take that card out of the newsagent window.
Yep.
I like that little attention
nice
to detail.
Absolutely. Yep, I agree. So anyway, Arthur's still out making tea and Phil's made his phone call and he's sort of almost, not that he's sort of a thief or anything, which he might be if he can get away with it, but he starts casing the joint and he looks at this photo of Arthur. Yep. So can you run the listener through this photo of Arthur thing?
Well, I think there's a couple of these, but the first one is, I think it's the stack of autograph photos. But it's a really weird photo where Arthur's basically looking at you, but as if he was in the room with you. And then there's a second one, which is him looking at you out of a doorway. I think that one might be hanging on a wall or something like that. Yeah.
So he's looking at it in a frame, and it's Arthur peeking his head around the corner of the doorway.
The doorway, which is immediately adjacent to the photo,
So Phil looks over his shoulder to the exact same doorway, expecting to see Arthur in it, and as if he's thinking, is that the same doorway? And why is this photo here, and what the bloody hell's going on? Looks at the photo, looks at the doorway, looks at the photo, turns around, looks at the doorway, and Arthur's poked his head around there.
Yeah,
exactly the same as the photo. And that's all hilarious, but then he says, would you like sugar and a biscuit? Because I have neither of those things.
Nice one.
Oh dear, my sides are splitting. God, that's funny.
Only because it's would you like a purse of...
Yeah, a monies, which I'm not going to... Here's a purse of monies, which I'm not going to give to you. Yeah.
It's like he's giving you the thing and then he's taking it away.
He's ripping off Ben Elton there, Graham Linehan. It's disgraceful.
Oh, well. If you're going to rip anyone off, rip off another master.
Ben Elton. Fair enough. is this, with the photo business, right? Because it's a bit surreal. And I'm sure it reminded me a bit of in Black Books where we see where they're having their door fitted for security, and Bill Bailey looks into the hair of the guy installing the door, and there's this tiny, tiny little miniature footballer in this guy's hair, a mini footballer figurine. Do you remember this bit in Black Books?
That sounds like almost a young one's level of bizarreness.
Anyway, so I wonder if this is a Graham Linehan, Arthur Matthews type thing. And then someone more knowledgeable than me will say, well, that episode of Black Books, Jeffrey, was written by neither of those two chaps, and it's not that sort of thing. And here's the bits where this photo gag has been used.
I half wondered if there's a horror movie out there where the psycho killer or whatever has done the same thing, taken photos of themselves like that.
Yeah, all the photos are of Arthur, which is a bit odd in itself. We're back at the cafe now, and Brillant is following Cinema around, and he's reading out loud to her, right, from this website about serial killers. And he's just listing off this description of all these serial killers' personalities, and they're all terrifyingly like Arthur.
Yeah.
So I think it's time for a clip.
You can't hide from this scene. Manipulative and cunning.
Bullet!
Grandiose sense of self.
What's this?
From a website about serial killers. Listen, who does this remind you of? Lack of remorse, shame, or guilt?
Arthur. Arthur's definitely Arthur.
Poor behavior controls, lack of realistic life plan, parasitic lifestyle. These are the core qualities of a sociopath. The core qualities of a sociopath. I tell you, he's a time bomb. He's dangerous. Tick, tick, tick.
He is one of the sweetest people we get in here. Michael, please.
Get off the fence boy! Listen, oblivious or indifferent to the devastation they cause, does not accept blame themselves, but blames others for acts they have obviously committed.
It's like he's in the room.
Meanwhile, some of Arthur's mail has come in to Michael, and we find out there's this big A4 envelope that's from the TV studio, and so obviously they assume that it's Arthur's psych evaluation is in there from Celebrity Flatshare. And, Bullant's going, open it, dude, open it.
Yep.
And, Michael knows he's going to get in trouble from seeing him if he opens it. But I'm just thinking, how could you not open it? I mean, it's clearly wrong, but it's irresistible. But he does manage to resist for a little while. And we go to a short scene back at Arthur's place. So Phil, the dodgy plumber, is finishing his cup of tea, and he's just reading the paper. And even Arthur, who doesn't mind this sort of thing, he's sort of saying, well, this guy's finished his tea. Maybe he wants to do some actual work. But what I love is he says, I'm glad you're enjoying that cup of tea. I didn't make myself one because I saw what the water looked like. And Phil has to... He spits it back, yeah.
Did you notice that it's actually a mug from Boulant's Cafe?
No way. So he's stolen it?
Yeah.
Arthur. That's an Arthur-y thing to do.
Boulant's not going to like that when he comes in later?
No way. What a mug. So as we mentioned, Arthur suggests Phil might want to actually do some work. So he leads Phil to the under the stairs bit, which I assume goes down to a basement, and the boiler's in there. And Phil shuts the door behind him. And you just hear crash, bang. Or you hear the sort of the creaking and snapping of a floorboard, and then tumble, 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 and a scream.
Yep.
So Phil's fallen down the stairs.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Poor Phil.
And it's at this point that the Halloween horror starts, because things get a little bit like Misery and a little bit like Psycho and a little bit like other movies.
Yeah, I thought, Misery came to mind immediately.
Yeah.
I'm not a big horror movie person. I've probably watched less than half a dozen in my entire life, but Misery, well, it's kind of a horror movie, but it's also, a lot more of a psychological thriller.
Yes.
But, yes, that's one I have seen. So... immediately I thought, here we are. He's in bed.
Yep.
He's got the legs immobilized by a psycho.
He totally does. There's a quick scene at the cafe before that, though. So, Boulant's hassling Michael to open the evaluation. What he keeps saying is he's saying, look, Arthur's this, clearly a psycho. And, he's a ticking time bomb. And he keeps saying, tick, tick, tick. As if to say, don't prevaricate in opening this envelope. We've got to do something before Arthur goes off the deep end. People are going to get hurt.
He also says, get off the fence boy.
Yeah.
I love that line.
It was good. So anyway, yeah, we go back to Arthur's and we've got a close-up on Phil, like you said, Steve. He's coming back to consciousness and he's got this nasty cut on the bridge of his nose and he is lying in bed, but he's got blood all over his face and he's sort of clearly confused. He's come to and he's wearing pajamas. So he goes to get out of the bed and he whips the covers open and sees his own legs and he goes, ah! Because they're all, huge fence palings and thick rope tied around his legs to keep them straight. Anyway, very similar to Misery, like you say. And so Phil screams and he's frantically trying to untie his legs, but we hear the doom-laden slow footsteps of Arthur coming up the stairs. Clonk, clonk, clonk. And you hear of the door opening, all these horror movie sounds. Arthur cheerfully pops his head around the corner and goes, hello! I love the contrast of the spooky with the cheerful. He apologises for not remembering to tell Phil about the broken cellar steps.
He says, the people that have fallen down those steps. Like it's happened a dozen times before. And he's never bothered to mention...
or fix them.
To insert or replace the missing step.
Yes. And here's where we start to get a nice lowbrow gag because Arthur goes, right, I've tied your legs up real good. They'll heal very well. I tied them up because they were broken, but don't worry, the knots are completely secure because I used a double barrel hitch and a fisherman's knob. Which
I thought it was a double nub. I had it written down.
Oh, no, fisherman's knob.
Fisherman's knob?
Yeah, he just wants to say the word knob. Come on, Steve.
Blimey.
Don't try and raise it up out of the gutter.
I'm going back and putting the subtitles on.
Yeah. Well, we've got a clip anyway.
What have you done to my legs?
No. I've took the precaution of putting splints on them, just in case they're broken. Just some old bits of fencing and rope I had lying about. Don't worry, those knocks are completely secure. I used a double barrel hitch and a fisherman's knob. Houdini himself would not be able to get out of those. Oh, yes.
Where are my clothes? Did you put me in these pyjamas?
I did, yes. A friend gets me them from the hospital. Well, they'd only incinerate them if I didn't have them.
So, yeah, we see a panicked Phil scratching himself and sweating, and he's got blood on him. And, more props to the actor who we're going to talk about in a sec. But Arthur, he's just all smiling and he's helpful. And Phil asks for his phone and his wallet. Presumably because Phil wants to call for help. And Arthur's sort of, yep, I'll get those for you. They're obviously downstairs. They came out of your pockets when you fell down the stairs. I'm going to get right onto that as soon as I've brought up your soup.
Yeah. I'm not sure why soup is his top priority.
Because when someone's poorly, Steve, and you give them the chicken soup and all that sort of stuff, so obviously it's...
If their legs are broken...
To help heal somebody.
Soup will affect an immediate recovery.
Yes, that's right. But yes, let's talk about Cavan Clerkin, Steve, the actor who plays Phil, and in my opinion doing an awesome job of being freaked out. He's recently been a series regular in a show called The Capture as DC Flynn. So he's done tons of those. He's been in 30 episodes of the UK historical drama The Last Kingdom.
Wow, okay.
Which is pretty cool. This is all within the last few years. He was a regular in the sitcom The Agency with Morgana Robinson in 2016. And he was one star of the comedy series called Pulling. That's cool. He's got form, this dude.
Was that a sitcom, that one? Or was that
Yes. It was a sort of romance comedy, this Pulling thing. So
wow, good on him. He's had lots of work.
Oh, yeah. Back to Arthur's upstairs room, though. Over the next few minutes, we find out that Arthur accidentally did destroy Phil's clothes. Arthur's saying, all right, after you've had your soup, we can play Cluedo. And the first comment out of Phil's mouth is, Cluedo doesn't work with two people. And this keeps coming up again in the episode as well. Yeah. And is that meant to illustrate how unhinged Arthur is that he's playing a game clearly doesn't work for two people? And out of all the games he could choose, he's
just one of the multiple things that's illustrating his zaniness, isn't it?
Yeah. Well phrased, Steve. Very diplomatic.
Well, I think the clothes thing, that would be very disconcerting if you woke up and you're in someone else's clothes.
Yeah, it would be, especially someone who's
And
dead.
He's obviously undressed you as well,
yeah,
while you're unconscious and all this sort of stuff. It completely freak you out.
You would feel violated.
Arthur says that freeing Phil from the splints would result in a heart attack.
Yeah.
Which seems like another completely mad thing to say.
It does.
Where's he getting this from?
I don't know, but he got the idea to cut the dude's clothes off with scissors from an episode of Casualty. So he's obviously watched these episodes of Casualty.
That's right. That's how the clothes got destroyed.
Yeah. He goes, I had to cut them off with scissors. And he goes, why? He goes, well, I saw it on an episode of Casualty. And funnily enough, in Cavan Clerkin's credits is a whole bunch of episodes of Casualty. So there you go. I think everyone on this show must have been in Casualty. It's like the Bill.
And Coronation Street and things like that.
All that sort of stuff.
It's a staple.
Oh, man.
Where are we at?
Right, so where we're at is he does come back with Phil's phone, and instead of handing it to him, he goes, oh, this is a fancy new phone. Has this got all the features on it? Has it got a camera on it? And he goes, oh, good. Oh, let's take a selfie. So he takes a horrifying selfie of himself with a very freaked out
Phil in the background.
And then, this, I love this, is he's shaking the phone around like it's a Polaroid picture from the old days.
He's literally shaking it like a Polaroid picture.
And he says to Phil, look now, I'll give you your phone back once you've had some soup. And so Phil goes, I don't want any soup. And so he just thinks, this is the only way I'm getting my phone back.
Yep.
So he takes a bit, but it's so scalding hot that he burns his tongue. Poor dude. And Arthur helpfully says, don't worry, I'll cool it down, I'm blowing it for you, and blows it straight into his eyes. So he's got boiling hot soup in his eyes.
Yes, that's what I meant by torturing him with soup.
Yeah. Oh.
That was absolutely classic.
Yeah. And then we hear the brilliant line, there's nothing worse than beef broth over a dead man's Jim Jam.
I've got that one written down.
Yeah.
That's classic.
Arthur eventually ends up dropping Phil's phone into the soup. Now, obviously, you'd think, can't he just go in and quickly grab it? But your phone's going to be knackered. But, of course, he doesn't want to burn his hand by shoving it into the boiling hot soup and retrieving the phone.
It's no bother. He's just going to make some more soup.
So Arthur goes back off downstairs. He goes, I'll boil more bones.
I'll boil you some more bones. You think to yourself, what kind of bones are going into this soup?
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Good point. But with Arthur gone, Phil struggles over to the window. He's sort of crawled out of the bed and across the floor. Now, he can't stand up because of his legs being bound. So he's banging on the window shouting help, but all you can see from the street is like a hand. And Bullen happens to be walking by at this point, and he just hears help, and he sees the thumping on the window from just this hand.
Well, it's proving his theory, isn't it?
It totally is. So he goes running back to the cafe. Because he's clearly stocking up on gear, right? Because he's got his hands full of shopping bags, so he's not just walking by. They've made an effort to.
Oh yeah. He's not. There's a purpose for him being there.
Yeah, thank goodness for that. So Phil struggles across the floor on his elbows, having had no luck with the window, and he's going to try and get out the door. And he's pulling himself along the floor, breathing heavily, and he finally gets near the door, and he looks up to this chest of drawers next to the door, and there's a photo of Arthur staring downwards very disapprovingly at him. But the door opens right into Phil's head as Arthur comes in, clonk, right on the head. And Arthur's carrying this knife, right? So he's rushed upstairs with his knife because he'd been downstairs cutting liver for their tea.
I think there's a cut there, isn't there? And when after the cut, Phil's back in bed, so...
I think he helps him back to bed or something. Yeah, that's what
Arthur puts him back in bed.
Yeah, from memory, I thought he'd helped him back to the bed.
Okay.
Because Phil's taken this blow to the head. He's not knocked out, but he's not resisting. He's not up to resisting.
Yep.
As Arthur drags him back to bed, puts him back to bed. Anyway, so Arthur's saying, I'm very cross with you, and he's waving this knife around. But yes, he had been cutting up a liver downstairs for their tea, which is all, oh man.
Did you hear the sound effect?
No. What was it?
He's waving the knife around going...
No, I didn't hear that. I'll pay more attention.
Talking about paying attention, did you notice the thing on...
The bed shelf?
Yeah, the bed shelf, let's say.
With multiple legs.
Mantelpiece for a bed.
Yeah.
Yeah. You noticed what it was?
And it's like a baby chicken, but with 6 sets of legs or something, and it's a like freaky looking...
Chicken had you'd crossed a chicken with a centipede or something. It's got 10 legs. It's a chick with 10 legs.
Which is freaky.
What is this thing?
I don't know. If Phil had looked around and seen that would have been the...
Yeah, it's a good thing you can't turn around.
It'd make him snap. Oh. So Arthur's telling Phil off. And he's saying, look, if you keep moving around, you're never going to heal up. And he's gesturing around with this knife, which is a very threatening-looking knife. And there's a conversation where Arthur, despite being annoyed at Phil, he is impressed that Phil hasn't been bothered by what must by now be incredibly itchy legs. And
the last thing you want to do is think about those itchy legs.
And this is psychological torture, essentially.
Yeah, that's right. We should also mention that...
Not on purpose.
Or Arthur has taken the liberty of phoning Phil's office while he was unconscious and telling them that he wouldn't be in for a few weeks.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Like it's a 3-week sleepover.
Yeah. And he loves having people to stay, to play Cluedo with and make soup for and cut up liver for their tea.
Yeah. 2-player Cluedo.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, so they talk about this, don't they, in that he's saying, well, can you ring my office for me? And he goes, do I have a phone? Of course I've got a phone. It's how I get all my work in my profession, on the phone. And he goes, well, can you go down? He goes, wow, it's been disconnected.
So I wonder how Arthur did actually.
Yeah. Well, Arthur offers to go around the corner because there's a public phone.
Right.
And so that is the plot thing in why he's out. So when, as we're about to find out, Michael and Bullen turn up, that's why Arthur is out of the building. So when they sneak into Arthur's house, Arthur's not there because he's round making a phone call.
To Phil's office.
To the nasty Steve. Yeah.
Right, we're back on track then.
We're back on track. So, at the cafe, Bulent has burst in and he said, I saw a dude, in Arthur's window and we've got to get round there and sort this out right now.
Tick, tick, tick.
And, tick, tick, tick. All that sort of stuff. So he recruits Michael into going around there with him. And they make their way into the house. They're a bit scared, right? And this is where Bulent sees the tray of glasses and tells Michael it's the glasses of all the people Arthur's killed.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
If I was entering the home of a psycho killer, Michael's the last person I'd want alongside me. Surely.
No, it's that theory of you don't have to outrun them, you only have to outrun the slowest person. So he offers Michael up as a sacrifice.
The sacrificial goat.
While he runs away.
All right, fair enough.
No. But Bulent doesn't need to run away, Steve, because he's got a whisk. Yeah.
It's a very long whisk.
Yeah, so it's a great sight gag. So this fearful but very determined Bullen says, we end this, Michael. We end this now. And he holds up a weapon and it's a whisk. So at this point, they open the letter, though, Steve, because they're worried Arthur might have snapped and started killing people, so they want to know what they're dealing with.
They're hearing screams from upstairs, aren't
they? They're hearing, well, not quite yet, no. And so in order to know what they're dealing with, they open up the letter to see what that says. And, of course, all the personality traits that are listed in the letter match exactly the
things they were talking about profile before in the cafe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is where we hear Phil screams, and so the boys rush up the stairs to aid Phil, but they open the door right into his head again because he'd been trying to escape again. So Phil was back on the floor, cops it in the head because he'd been trying to crawl to freedom. And it's time for another clip.
Oh, this is ridiculous. I know Arthur. I don't care what that letter says. Just put the whisk away before you hurt someone.
Help! Please help me!
What's going on? You see?
Get these off of me before he comes back. There's a knife over there.
Arthur did this to you?
He's a monster.
Aha! Where's he gone? What's happened?
These pyjamas are from the hospital. Somebody died in them.
Arthur did this to your legs?
Yeah. He said he saw it on Casualty. He was going to make me play Cluedo with him.
Cluedo doesn't work with two people.
So we hear noise downstairs of Arthur arriving back from making the phone call. Michael and Bullen, their blood runs cold and they start panicking. And they've seen Phil in this awful state, and Phil's been sort of frantically telling them all about the bad things happening. Oh, he did this to me, and then he did that. And they're going, yep, that doesn't surprise us.
They're frantically trying to untie the double barrel hitch.
Yeah.
And the double nub.
And the fisherman's knob. Yes, they're untying all the splints before Arthur makes it up the stairs. So it's a race against time because you can hear Arthur coming up the stairs and he's shouting upstairs to Phil saying, oh, I've got this for you and I hope you didn't miss me and we're going to do this and it's going to be great and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, and so they manage to direct Phil over to the window and just push him out of it for his own safety, of course. And then hear, whoa, and then smash on the ground. And they've got nowhere to hide, and Arthur's right on the doorstep, and so they leap into the wardrobe. Arthur comes in.
Yeah.
And he says, Phil, where are you? Are you playing hide and seek or something, he thinks?
Are you in the wardrobe?
Yeah, so he then turns around and he goes, are you hiding? And he opens the wardrobe and it's incredibly frightened, our two heroes there.
Yeah, so they are convinced at this point that Arthur's gone troppo.
Yeah, because they've literally seen the damage to this guy, and there's a knife on the dresser, and then, you know, he's got all the injuries and the stuff, and everything this guy is saying checks out about this is what Arthur would do. I reckon they're pretty convinced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does do you remember what Arthur's reaction is when he opens the wardrobe and they scream?
No, but well, let's look at it now in real time.
He screams.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm surprised Phil can run or walk or anything. I think your legs would be so... If they'd been immobilised for a couple of days, he couldn't have landed.
No, and again, the writers are ahead of us with this, right? So as they're dragging him over to the window, he says his legs are numb.
Yeah.
But maybe the adrenaline of being pushed out the window and being freed from a serial killer, you know, you can do amazing things, dude. So he might have been, and he's staggering off down. And what I like is they didn't do a wide shot of him running down the street. They've got this super tight shot on, you know, him from like more or less the chest up, and all you can see is a brick wall. So it's like he's hugging himself to the brick wall for safety as he goes along. But he's sort of crying because he's so relieved to be out of there, but he's so traumatized he's still crying. I don't want to over-intellectualize it or anything, but it's brilliant direction and it's great acting. And
he's thinking to himself, Arthur's going to have to deal with those other two guys upstairs before he comes out for me. So he's probably away, right?
I reckon, yeah, absolutely. And you think, right, this is the end of the episode. We've got 2 more scenes to go. Thank you for bearing with us, dear listener. We move ahead to some time later, and, you know, you get your typical sitcom end of the episode explanation. So it's all happening in the cafe, and this is where we'll have another quick clip.
It was very strange, Eggy. He just ran off and left all this behind. But if it was the same man, I'd say he was almost asking me to return this money to you, along with an extra 100 for all the trouble he caused you.
Oh, Arthur, I don't know what to say.
There's nothing to say, Eggy. It's just one of those things.
So, he was the same guy that was supposed to fix Eggy's boiler?
Yeah, it would appear so.
And Arthur didn't know that?
He says he didn't.
He knew.
Oh, he didn't. I told you, Arthur's just a sweet old man.
He's a psychopath.
What do you think, Michael?
I'm still on the fence.
I was wondering, did Arthur know before all these events that Eggy had been ripped off? Doesn't seem that way, because he would have put 2 and 2 together when Phil came round to do the boiler job. So it seems like, yeah, perhaps afterwards he found out and realised.
I think so.
He had the dude's wallet, right?
Oh, yes, that's
With
right,
his,
because he still had his wallet.
Yeah, had not only the 200 quid, but some extra money.
An extra 100 quid.
Yeah, nice. And it had his photo and whatever the plumber. Was it even a legit plumber ID? Probably not. Maybe
it was. May not have been. Although he does say in the scene we're going to talk about in just a sec, so there's what I've called a needless scene afterwards where you have got Phil and he appears to be on a date and he's at this sort of restaurant-y place and he's explaining to his date how, you know, he's turned his life around and he's doing all this stuff because he had this horrible experience and he's just relating it all to her. And she's saying, wow, you know, that's amazing, but do you ever think about it? And this is where the waitress comes over and he looks up and he's hallucinating the waitress as Arthur and she's offering him some soup and he goes, oh, I don't like soup.
Yeah.
And
to be honest, I could have done without that scene.
Yeah.
I wish they'd put 30 seconds of other material into the...
Oh, good. I'm glad you're thinking the same as me. But we do get to see Steve Delaney in a waitress outfit, so that's all right. Yeah. If you're into that sort of thing.
That's your cup of tea.
Yeah, exactly. If that's your bowl of soup.
I thought that the scene with Aggie was would have made just a really good ending to the whole thing.
I agree. And I'm going to comment on that in a minute.
Ooh, go on then.
But yes, as I've said, you know, Phil's clearly been terribly scarred by the whole experience to the point where he can't handle soup. Yeah, good. And I've said no soup overs for him.
But he's turned a corner, right?
He has.
He's legit now. He's on the straight and narrow.
So it all turned out all right, apart from the hideous trauma that's going to stick with him for the rest of his life. Anyway, that brings us to the end of that episode of Count Arthur Strong. And before I get into some of my stuff here, Steve, it's have you got any overall comments?
Well, I've got a few. We've talked about how all the setup is done really well. That's very neat and tidy. Things like the explanation behind why Michael has got Arthur's mail, and then, the fact that that's related to his celebrity status having risen recently, and then that ties into other things. So, and that explains the autograph as well. Arthur thinks that because he's now an even bigger celebrity, people wanting his autograph. So all that stuff is really neatly tied up and seeded earlier on in the episode. And then I like the use of second gags, which I mean by that I mean things like you've got the glasses in the scene with Phil and Arthur.
Yes.
But then they use it again when Bulent and Michael come in, and Bulent picks up the tray and goes, "These are all the dead people's glasses."
Yeah. And then he picks up that set with no glass in them, and he pokes his fingers through like after he goes, "What possible use are these? They've got no glass in them. What sort of madman has these?"
Yeah, exactly. And the whisk, I thought, was another example of that, where you see the whisk in the cafe. Bulent is wielding the whisk in the cafe when he's talking about how his mum had got ripped off, like Eggy. And then, of course, you see him take the whisk out later on when they're getting into to Arthur's flat. So just lots of little things like that, little callbacks. And then just finally, we talked about the sequence where we go from the autograph, the pan and the glasses. And it's, I don't know how, I didn't time it, but it has to be 5 or 6 minutes.
It's exactly 5 minutes, give or take about 1 second. It's 5 minutes 40 or 4 minutes 40 to 9 minutes 40.
It's the kind of thing that on the page could look a bit iffy, but I think Steve Delaney he's a genius the way he carries it off. And maybe that's what you were talking about before, where season 2 they knew they could pull something like that off easily. So, yeah, he's just a genius.
I totally agree.
They're my few thoughts.
And you've made a lot of my notes redundant with, so no, it's good. Jolly well done. There's other great lines as well. The dead man's pajamas, as I mentioned before.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than beef broth on a dead man's Jim Jams.
Well,
and,
even the fact that their pajamas had been taken off a corpse and the corpse had psoriasis, and now we've got the beef broth on top of that. I mean, how could it get any worse?
And what I love is in sitcoms where they'll talk about something that happened off screen. So imagine the conversation or the circumstances that led to Arthur somehow being in a hospital and somehow asking if he can have this guy's pajamas and all that. I mean, there was the episode where, and the character whose name we forgot, she died in the hospital. Did he get them when he was at the hospital then? When he was pretending to be a doctor? Remember when Count Arthur was a doctor?
It's possible.
Yeah, who knows? Anyway, just things like that. But yeah, Cluedo doesn't work with two people is another thing. And I've written down a line here where he's talking to Phil in that frustrating initial exchange where he goes, "I'm just a regular Joe like you, Phil," except different, obviously, because I'm famous and you're just a plumber. But I do have a life, Joe. So he's gone from saying, "I'm an average Joe," to calling Phil Joe.
Yeah.
This is so typical Arthur. Oh, man, I love it. And I was going to say, this is going to sound negative, but I think because in this particular episode, there's not a lot of the Michael frustrating wussiness. It's a minimum in this episode, and so I liked it because there's a lot of Arthur being annoying. I do love Count Arthur because it has heart, right? So I'm not saying that a good episode is one where you've got a minimum of that stuff. Because Count Arthur can bring a tear to the eye. It's not unheard of.
Yep.
It's pretty good, but I have to be in the right mood for that. And the middle of series 2 isn't where you want that sort of stuff. So I did love, though, like you said, how it was quite touching when Eggy got his money back and he was almost speechless and he didn't know how to thank Arthur. And that actor is just so good at playing Eggy in this very earnest way. And it's lovely, dude. So
Eggy is the ultimate genuine, gentle character, so
yeah,
the fact that he was the one that was ripped off just makes it all that much worse.
It does. But yeah, that 5 minutes of the autograph and the pen and the glasses, it's just brilliant. So I've sort of thought this might be a middling Count Arthur episode. If I'd nominated this for the Hall of Fame, I can imagine you saying, "Well, Jeffrey, in the pantheon of Count Arthur episodes, there are much better episodes, and so I wouldn't put this one in the Hall of Fame. But what I'm saying is, even I think it's not in the top tier of Count Arthur episodes. But how good is a show if something that's so middling can still make you laugh that much?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's a good point. I mean, I'm thinking there's a couple of nitpicks with this one, but...
Oh, cool. What have you got?
Pretty solid. Oh, well, the addition of that final scene with Phil at the restaurant, I could have done without that.
Yep.
And, yeah, I think some of the stuff at the cafe with the Bullant and Michael and Sinem, while Phil is captive at Arthur's place, some of that could have done with a bit more zing or something like that. I'm not sure. But, yeah, it's really not much to nitpick in this one.
Oh, fair enough, too.
What about you? Is there anything you
no,
change?
Pretty much what you said. We're in a rare turn of events. We're pretty much on the same page the whole way through this. But the reason I picked this episode, and I just thought, it's Halloween, I can make the very weak justification, is because years ago I watched this, and I had a thought, Steve, and my thought is this, and I must have watched Faulty Towers with Mrs. Richards, which is another episode we've covered on Sitcom Showdown, and it occurred to me throughout that 5-minute scene that what's happened here is they've flipped the script, right? So in Faulty Towers, we've got the classic episode with the partially deaf Mrs. Richards, who's thoroughly unlikable, annoying, rude woman.
Yep.
She uses her deafness to bully people and harangue them, and she'll tie them up in these knots of logic on their part, but then when someone uses it back at her, it's completely ignored and glossed over. So Arthur is Mrs. Richards in this case. Except he's now, instead of being the villain, he's the hero of the piece. So he's the doddery old dude with the misunderstandings and, the glasses and the pen and the, for all these reasons that Mrs. Richards is the villain of Faulty Towers, he uses the same annoying habits and traits to make him the hero of this situation, where Phil is his guest in his hotel, so to speak. It's totally turned it around, but also, is Arthur the good guy in this? Because you almost start feeling... You feel sorry for Phil at times. Did you ever feel sorry for Phil at any point?
No.
You didn't.
And
I sort of almost did.
Arthur's friends,
what
kind of true friends are they? They should have just had faith in him.
Well, possibly so.
But he never got his boiler fixed.
No, and nor did Eggy for that matter.
No.
Oh, man.
But Eggy got his 200 quid back, so he can find...
a proper plumber. Yeah.
There's also a bit of Maggie beer.
Oh, dude. Good
Arthur,
call.
Isn't there?
Yeah.
Because you're never really sure. Are they just messing with me or doing this for effect, or are they really like a bit off their rocker or a bit of the old...
Yeah, are they using it to get their way?
Alzheimer's or whatever.
Yeah. So I enjoyed that, and it wasn't quite the Halloween episode the listener was expecting, I'm sure, but Count Arthur Strong, it's well overdue for a return to Sitcom Showdown.
Absolutely, thanks for that. And I guess I better start thinking about next month.
And then it'll be Christmas.
I've been looking out for that season of Parks and Recreation on DVD for $1, but still haven't found it.
Oh, well.
Who knows, I might have to spring for that episode on YouTube or something.
So Parks and Rec next time, hopefully, possibly.
Oh, I've got other ideas as well, so we'll see. And we've got some suggestions from people recently as well.
Yeah. So
there's a bit of a list I can draw on.
Yeah, so thank you for your contact, people who have contacted us, and our email address is sitcomshowdown@gmail.com.
Yep, or hit us up on Twitter and Facebook.
Cool.
Yeah, a couple of other options.
All right, so you shall hear from us, hopefully, before the end of the year.
Yes, oh, definitely. Definitely. Right, see you, listeners.
Ta-ta! Join us next time on Sitcom Showdown when we'll be putting another 5-star episode under the microscope. And in the meantime, you can contact us with feedback on Facebook, Twitter @Sitcom Showdown, or by email sitcomshowdown@gmail.com.